So I want to talk today about assessment in the Common Core and whether the tests that are out there are going to support us or subvert us in our vision of deeper learning of the language arts. By the way, this is some of the new text I put in response to David's talk. David, the critiques that I've offered have been offered in the spirit of critical colleagueship. I actually want the standards to succeed. And I will say in David's defense, he has listened to some of my concerns. Not all of them, but some of them he's responded to, I think, very aptly. I view the Common Core as a work in progress, not a finished product. And I think that's exactly why I will continue to critique it. I think the issue on close reading, David, is that I don't equate close reading and literal comprehension. And I know you didn't intend that in that document, but I think that's how people have interpreted it. I think that one of the most important reasons for close reading is critique and connection. And I desperately want to see these standards work their magic. But just as we want kids to base their claims on evidence, so we must hold our standards to that same standard. And so I think we all need to make sure that we do that. Assessing literacy problems and possibilities. I've been trying to get assessment right since about 1983 or 4. And I'm still working on it, along with Karen Wixon. And Karen and Sheila and I started working about the mid-'80s, right, is when we started working on assessment. And we're still trying to get it right. I want to talk about where we're headed. And I want to talk where we could and should be headed. And by the way, I'll put my slides up on this website. But Freddie, are you going to put things on your TextProject website too? Where's Freddie to go? Well, at any rate, a little context. My interest, as I said, stems from all those attempts to build, state assessments, portfolio assessments, assessment systems, and to work with schools to build assessment systems rather than collections of tests. And I really think that that's an important distinction. I think I have this conviction that accountability should not drive us into a corner in which we engage in practices that are not in the best interest of students, teachers, or the public. And I think we have an opportunity provided by the current forces at work. Well, what are those forces? I think it's a swing away from the basics mentality of no child left behind, a swing toward the Common Core, and an increased pressure for deeper learning and 21st century skills coming mainly from business and industry. No child left behind. No one is fussing as much about fundamental skills these days, the subword and fluency stuff. They hover quietly but ever present in the background. And I think what we have nowadays is a kind of a 2 but not 3 cheers for phonics. And I think that's probably about the right place in which to be. From the Common Core, we have wonderful prose to guide us. You've all seen this prose before. But I think the vision of reading that begins the Common Core ELA standards is really, really great. Students who meet the standards do close, attentive reading. It's the heart of understanding and enjoying complex works of literature. They build their thoughtful engagement. They build knowledge, enlarge experience, and their worldviews. I mean, this is an incredibly wonderful vision of reading, and I think that's what should be promoted in our assessments. Also, there's been a group working on issues of deeper learning. There's a new publication by the National Academy of Science, Education for Life and Work, which talks about 21st century skills. And it's basically about problem solving, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and self-management. And these are what we call deeper learning or 21st century skills. And you can see why business and industry is concerned about these, because it's nice to have the basics, but the basic skills don't get you very far in the world of, in the kind of international competitive environment in which we live and work. Well, so here's my 3-minute history of reading assessment. How did we get to where we are? I go back to 1960s when I was a classroom teacher. And when I was a teacher in the 1960s, I gave every year end of unit, end of level tests, and I gave the Iowa test of basic skills, scored it by hand, took it to my principal and said, what do I do with it? He says, it doesn't matter, you can do whatever you want with it. I mean, there were no consequences for the assessment. And that was a kinder, gentler time. Tests were there, but they had few consequences. The turning point really in our history is the 1967 reauthorization of Title I, where for the first time we traded accountability for flexibility. We got the money, but we had to send in test scores, and for that we got to teach in whatever ways we wanted to. There was no specification of any kind of curriculum and teaching models. That led in the 1970s to a revolution in assessment. I don't know if you remember these things, but behavioral objectives, criterion reference tests, curriculum embedded assessments, the minimal competencies test, and this is when statewide assessment started. In New Jersey, Michigan, and Minnesota is where it all started in the early 1970s. And we had this kind of management mentality. You would teach, assess, draw a conclusion, then you'd go on and teach, assess, and conclude something about the next skill. And you did it skill after skill until you built a system like this. You remember the skills management systems that were so prevalent at the time? What this led to, and this is one of my rules of thumb, the finer the grain size at which we monitor a process like reading and writing, the greater the likelihood that we will end up teaching and testing bits and pieces rather than global processes. It's just almost inevitable. And certainly we had a return to that in the days of No Child Left Behind. The 80s was a time of turmoil in assessment, and this is where Karen and I and many others started working on assessment reform. And it really was driven by a nation at risk, and the evolution of higher order thinking, driven by the business community. And we asked ourselves the question is, do we have assessments to match our models of learning? A key turning point was I can't remember whether it was 98 or 99, the Charlottesville conference that Bill Clinton sponsored, which is where the idea of standards-based reform came out. And it also led to performance and authentic assessment movements. And the goal was to eradicate the distinction between instruction and assessment. But not by making instruction look like assessment, but rather making assessment look like instruction. Key movements, the Vermont and portfolio assessment projects, portfolio graduation in high schools around the country. Do you remember the Coalition of Essential Schools and assessment by exhibition? I still see traces of it. Performance assessment from new standards in many states, and then also the models of teacher performance assessment that we found in the National Board Assessment and in states like Connecticut, which actually I think still has its performance assessment for teachers. And we seem to be moving back toward that a little bit in recent years, right? Well, here's what it looked like. You have a bunch of activities from which we can draw conclusions on any number of standards. And the key part in this is that we did not try to make instruction look like assessment, but rather make assessment look like instruction. For any given activity, you could get evidence from about many standards. So if I have kids do an IRI, right? I can get a lot of information about what? Decoding, fluency, comprehension. In other words, many standards can emanate from a single assessment, right? Conversely, for any given standard, there are lots of activities that are in our classrooms from which we can draw conclusions about any given standard, say comprehension or fluency or the like. Well, that's the complexity of it. That is, you have all these activities mapping on all these standards. And I think that what happened is the complexity of it all just drove people crazy. Here's an example of a performance task that I and a bunch of teachers, middle school teachers, did in the 1990s from the new standards work. It was about Martin Luther King and his civil disobedience. It's called The Man and His Message. It was a 6 or an 8 day task. You write an essay based upon choosing one of several response options. During that week, that 6 or 8 days, you read all these articles, some from popular press. We even had video clips from CNN on the various Rodney King riots in East LA and the like. That they completed a lot of tasks over that period of time. Cognitive webs, a logger chart of emerging learnings, answer straightforward assignment-like questions, compare the similarities and differences between King and Gandhi, and that culminating essay, and everything was scored. It was all scored with rubrics and things like that. And from that 2-week task, we could get a lot of information about reading and writing. It has a look and why was this useful? It has the look and feel of deeper learning, engages students in workplace-like behaviors. It expands our conceptualization of what counts as a text, high capacity for engagement, interest, and relevance. And it maps onto many of the Common Core standards for reading in history that we have nowadays, even though we wrote it in the 1990s. And it could build it also built a professional community of teachers around implementation and scoring. I don't know how many of you have ever been involved in scoring these kinds of performance tasks, but the professional learning that goes on probably makes it worth the effort for no other reason, because you are always asking questions about what kind of instruction would have to go on to support performance on tasks like these. The system imploded, exploded, and reploded. It died a premature death, I think, for 3 reasons. One was psychometric issues. There was the reliability of scoring, but the big issue was task generalizability. You couldn't be guaranteed that if you did task A and you did task B and you did task C, that you would all be rated the same. In other words, there was task by person interactions. And there were lots of measurement errors in it. And so that hurt cost issues and in terms of teacher time and expensive professional development. And political issues. In California, the real death of class was due to the fact that a group of conservative religious folks didn't want the schools asking kids' opinions. They only wanted the schools to deal with the facts of the curriculum. And the school had no right to delve into my kids' beliefs, if you will, and the like. So that's really what killed it there. By the way, there's also other reasons to worry about these. These are some answers to open-ended questions from science. Freddie has promised some hydrogen this afternoon if you all behave well. We're almost through with the history. A retreat from performance assessment in the No Child Left Behind years. Measure and teach reading in its atomistic, not its global aspect. Link instruction to assessment by specifying all the specific standards and building assessments for each standard, and then making our instruction look just like assessments. That's sort of the approach implicit in a lot of the assessment that we did under No Child Left Behind, particularly DIBELS. I always ask of those performance assessments, and particularly DIBELS, whether or not, the question for me is always, if you teach and test to DIBELS, will kids get better at something that matters? And if they could demonstrate that, I would back off my critique of those kinds of assessments. So if you give the DIBELS, and then you use the results to craft instruction, and then you give the DIBELS again, kids get better at it. But the question is in the process of getting better at DIBELS, do they get better at something like, did they make growth on something like a comprehension test? And if they did, I would back off. But I've never seen that demonstration. So I think this is a test for any set of constrained skills, to use Scott Paris's terms. That is, if you're teaching the lower level skills, does something happen that's bigger than that set of lower level skills? My rule of my inference in 2009, when we started looking at these standards and the like, is wherever we go, we must not go back to the world in which we link instruction to assessment at the finest grain size. We have to keep our eyes on the prize. What does accomplished performance look like? And for me, that meant sort of going back to the mid-90s and trying to get it right this time. So where are we headed in this post NCLB era? The Obama administration is keeping up the pressure on accountability. We have teacher accountability for student achievement, and PARC and Smarter Balance have received just over $350 million to develop the assessments that you see. But I'm not pessimistic about these. I actually am more optimistic than pessimistic about the assessments that are being developed right now. And we're a part of all this effort right now. So we have this new confluence of forces. We have the Common Core Standards, foundation funding, disciplinary delivery of literacy, which I am also a fan of. We have a reincarnation of ambitious pedagogy via the Press for Deeper Learning. And we have these PARCC and Smarter Balance assessments, which are largely hybrid assessments. You know, there's a lot of constructed response, there's performance tasks, but there's also some conventional multiple choice. And you know what there is a lot of is what they call technology enhanced items, which are basically multiple choice items, but you can move stuff around. And this afternoon, Karen is going to take us through a lot of examples from PARCC and Smarter Balanced, and you'll see these in much more detail. Why performance assessment? I think you got to have it for both external validity and curricular validity reasons. I don't know how you can get kids college ready if you don't have performance assessments to measure it. I don't know of any multiple choice tests that really do the job for us. So I think you have to have it. And I would say even more so for career ready, because most people in their jobs, when they do literacy tasks, don't take multiple choice tests. They actually do something, right? You write a memo, you read something, and you're responsible for the information. And I think we also need to be PARCC and Smarter Balanced ready, and they're certainly going this direction. In terms of curricular validity, I think that we need these because if we don't have performance tasks, we'll fail the test of higher order thinking, powerful learning, or deeper learning. You know, I love the metaphors. You know, we used to do higher order thinking, and now we're doing deeper learning. Do you think we're going in a different direction? I can't figure it out. And why performance tasks? I think consequential validity. I think you know, have to have curricular activities that will lead teachers and students toward independence. I think in terms of utility, one of the things I like about both consortia, but particularly Smarter Balance, is they are really pushing to build this incredible library of formative assessment tools that help us sort of scale individual kids' programs, but more importantly, to give us feedback about whether or not our teaching is working. So I really want to look at those. But we also need summative assessments. Did we achieve our goals? And one of the things about PARCC in particular is it's really big on this notion of interim assessments, that is sort of benchmarks along the way to tell us whether we're moving toward the kind of summative assessment that we really want. Well, what are some shifts in evidence? Here are the three principles in PARCC that they say is what's new. Complex text, you know, evidence around every corner, reading and writing grounded in evidence from the text. Knowledge, building knowledge, that in other words, not only do you take a test, you also learn something new about the world. Smarter Balance is, I couldn't find a clear statement in their documents about what's new, but these are my inferences based upon a close reading. That they have a complex way of mapping their items onto standards. They don't have, it's not like you can go find a test for every standard in the Common Core. They have these things called claims, and basically the claims are that you can read closely and thoughtfully, that you can write stuff, that you can do research, and that you can do something with speech, right? And the like. Those are their big claims about the world. Then they have targets, and targets are as close as they get to anything that looks, that's what links sort of to the standards. They have lots of rubrics, anchor papers, complex tasks that provide scores for both reading and writing, and formative assessments galore. That's what Smarter Balance is. Oh, here I did put up the claims. Here are the 4 big claims from Smarter Balance, but notice how global they are. But I like that. I think that's good. I think using that to sort of frame the entire assessment is a virtue, not a vice, because it meets my standard of keeping our eye on the prize. The common elements to both PARCC and Smarter Balanced, hybrid formats, some selected or multiple choice items, constructed response, short ones, performance tasks, and these technology enhanced items. But the most important part about both assessments is they're both using Bob Mislevy's evidence-centered design. And evidence-centered design, like my colleague Mark Wilson's construct mapping and learning progressions. What you do is you start off with a theory, of the process you're trying to assess. And you build learning progressions that go from less to more sophisticated levels of it. And then you design your items that way. In other words, they don't design the items until the very end of the process, after they have kind of like the learning theory and the cognitive process is well worked out. And I think that's a much more sensible way to design assessments than we've done in the past. Here's just a few examples from Park and Smarter Balance to whet your appetite for Karen's presentation this afternoon. Here's a sample item. You read Julia of the Wolves, and then you get a multiple choice item. But look at the second, the part B. You have to now answer which sentence from the passage, these actually come from the passage themselves, and you have to click on the sentence. But then they have an item like this, where you choose the one word that best describes the character, and then you have to go find sentences that helped you rationalize that choice. And then what you do is you click on the sentence and you drag it into the box. You see how that works? So it's a drag and drop item. Lots of those. Here's another one. This is a typical sort of writing. They read a story and then they're asked to write a continuation of that story. Okay? Here's their specifications for a research project. Each module includes the opportunity to produce an extended project that uses research to address a significant topic, gathering and synthesizing information, assess the credibility of each source, a variety of formal and informal products that you can create, and ongoing incorporation of research for shorter tasks that lead up to the culminating project. And I can't remember how much time they do this, but it's something they build to across the term. Here's a few examples from Smarter Balance. Here's a prompt. You write a paragraph explaining why people who live in moist climates work harder to prevent mold than people that live in dry climates. This isn't the one you meant about how scintillating informational texts are, right, David? And you have to include details, and they've just read a passage about mold. Here's a performance. Here's specifications for the performance tasks on Smarter Balance. It's a 120-minute thing, and they're writing an essay about the pros and cons of virtual schools. And the part one is 35 minutes, and they review a bunch of texts, right? Take notes about these sources, and they respond to some constructive response questions along the way that, measure analyzing and evaluating information. And then part B is the part A can be done in a class setting. Part B is the essay you do on your own, okay? And both the work along the way and the culminating essay can be scored. Technology enhanced, select 3 sentences that show that Naomi is worried she has done something wrong. These are interesting because these do, it's a good example of close reading using text details to support an inference. I thought this one was interesting. This is a writing task. Kids, this is an essay that on the top, and then you have to revise that kid's paragraph by adding details from the daily schedule to help support reasons for having a longer school day. And this is interesting because it engages the kids in a writing task, but there's also a lot of close reading, careful examination of the text along the way to get there. So my analysis is this. Students who have learned how to read and write in a curriculum that requires constructed responses and real writing will lead to good performance on the Park and Smarter Balanced assessments. Students still wallowing in a bits and pieces curriculum will not do well on Park and Smarter Balance. There's just no way that I think it can happen. And why will the kids who've been developing those practices do well? Because they will have developed some transferable processes and practices that will serve them well in these new circumstances, and that's what we're really about, is developing transferable knowledge and skills. I've seen some really good work in some schools. I'm working with the New Vision schools in New York City with the Literacy Design Collaborative and the SCALE group, that's the assessment group at Stanford. And I think their work, I'll show you an example of it in a minute. I think I like the work that Lucy Calkins is doing in New York, where they're actually, doing performance assessments starting in grade 1, I believe, or 2 at least, all the way up through the middle school. And they've developed some really nice reading and writing tasks that do map directly onto the Common Core standards. What I like about all these efforts is that they're true to the Common Core, but they're also true to the vision of project-based learning, and they do present kids with opportunities to engage in challenging curriculum and pedagogy of the type that David was talking about. And lastly, I would point out that we're going to go live in a couple of days with the Literacy Research Panel website, and on there we're going to have, we actually sent out a call for teachers to develop project-based learning tasks that would meet the Common Core, and we're actually going to have a poster session on that on tomorrow afternoon. But we've got some really, I think, great stuff in that project too. Here's an example of one of the modules in the New Visions work. This is a teacher, Sarah Balut, who we worked with. And the culminating task is were the achievements and growth of the Industrial Revolution worth the cost to society? And what happens is over a period of about 3 or 4 weeks, the kids read 23 texts, some of them visual texts, many of them conventional texts, some of them video texts, lots of practice on the specific standards. And then it was this is a classic writing from reading sources a task, but it's a good task, and the population of kids with whom they did it were almost all immigrant kids from either the Dominican Republic or Haiti, and the kids did remarkably well on this activity. I liked what happened, particularly in reading from sources, but also the writing instruction that went on. My closing advice is this: be careful about how we link instruction and assessment. Most of the trouble that we've gotten into as a profession over the last 40 years has been when we get this link backwards, okay, where we start off with the assessment and then we map the instruction onto it. This is a model worth rejecting. You do the standards and you get the assessments, you derive the assessments, and then from the assessments you derive the instruction. That's the model. It's going to shape instruction in narrow ways, and it's going to lead to students who pass tests but who can't actually do the cognitive tasks that the test is designed to measure. It's what is that term, test score pollution, which means a rise or a fall in your score on a test without a concomitant rise or fall in the cognitive activity the test is supposed to measure. That's what should be rejected. Here's a different way of thinking about how to link instruction and assessment. We have standards, which are how we operationalize our values. We have assessment activities that derive from those standards, but we get the instructional activities straight from the standards too. In other words, we don't make the link from assessment to instruction. We make the link separately for those, and then we look to see how well they map onto one another after we've done that. I think instruction and assessment are linked because they both reflect the standards, not because they're a direct match, and not because the instruction follows the assessments. So I have high hopes. On good days, I think that the Common Core state standards filtered through PARC and Smarter Balanced are up to the challenge. They are certainly light years ahead of our state standards and assessments that we have now. And I'll be watching with very cautious optimism. My bottom line is this: we desperately need instructionally sensitive assessments that have first-rate psychometric characteristics so that we can build trustworthy internal systems for monitoring student progress. We also need to remember, as we deal with any assessment, that assessments have to be part of a system, that we can't rely on single assessments of anything to make important judgments. This is just an ethical rule that we must never violate. No decision of consequence about anyone or any aggregate of individuals should be based upon a single indicator of anything. There's no assessment in this world so perfect that it deserves to be followed without having some data surrounding it. Tests are a means to an end. Their value is indexed by the degree to which they allow us to make good decisions and promote good instruction for kids, classes, and schools. Bad things happen when tests become ends unto themselves. So, stakes matter, challenge matters. High stakes and low challenge is the worst possible scenario. If you have high stakes and low challenge, you will guarantee that most kids, particularly poor kids, will be stuck in a cycle of basic skills, and they will never get to the good stuff in the curriculum. And I actually think there's a possibility that we might get all kids to some good stuff in the curriculum if we have PARCC and Smarter Balance on our side. So never send a test out to do a curriculum's job. That's one of my things. Instead, send a test out to support the curriculum and those held accountable to it. That's really how we should think about all this. And this is logically possible within PARCC and Smarter Balance. So I'm going to hang in there for a while and see what comes. Thanks.